The silence in the house was thick, almost a tangible thing. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of an empty space waiting to be filled with life. It was a heavy, expectant silence, the kind that settles after a door has slammed shut or before a storm breaks. For Sarah, standing in the dimly lit hallway, it felt like the house itself was holding its breath. She had expected dust, maybe a few forgotten trinkets, the lingering scent of her great-aunt Mildred lavender and old paper, a comforting aroma from her childhood visits. Instead, there was this profound stillness and an undeniable sense that the house was not empty at all. It was lived in. Recently, the lawyer's call had been brief, almost impersonal. "Your great-aunt Mildred has passed away, Miss Evans. She left you the house on Willow Creek Lane." Just like that, a life concluded, a property transferred. Sarah had known Mildred was elderly, but the news still carried a strange weight, a sense of finality that resonated deeper than she anticipated. They hadn't been close in recent years, life having pulled Sarah into its relentless current of work, relationships, and the everyday minutiae that filled her 30s. But the memories of childhood summers spent at Willow Creek Lane, the sprawling garden, the attic filled with curious antiques, Mildred's gentle smile and endless stories, were etched in her heart with a fondness that time hadn't dulled. The house, a Victorian with peeling paint and a porch that sagged slightly on one side, looked much as Sarah remembered it from the outside. There was a familiarity in the overgrown rose bushes climbing the trellis and the crooked weather vane atop the turret. But stepping inside was like entering another world, a world where Mildred was a ghost and someone else had taken up residence in her life's sanctuary. It wasn't immediately obvious. There was no blaring music, no overflowing ashtrays, no signs of a raucous party. Instead, it was the subtle things. A pair of worn leather slippers placed neatly beside the armchair in the living room, an armchair Sarah distinctly remembered Mildred always covering with a floral-patterned throw. A half-finished cup of tea, cold now, sitting on the side table next to a book with a bookmark inserted halfway through. The air held a faint, unfamiliar fragrance, something musky and spicy, unlike Mildred's usual lavender. A knot of unease began to tighten in Sarah's stomach. Had the lawyer made a mistake? Was the house not vacant? She checked the documents again, the crisp legal paper feeling alien in her trembling hand. No, the address was correct. The name was correct. Everything pointed to this being her inheritance, Mildred's final gift. Hesitantly, Sarah moved further into the house. The living room was tidy, almost sterile, the only personal touch being the unfamiliar book and the cold teacup. The kitchen was equally devoid of Mildred's personality. The brightly colored magnets she used to collect were gone from the refrigerator. The familiar jars of homemade preserves were absent from the pantry shelves, replaced by generic supermarket brands. It was as if someone had systematically erased Mildred's presence and replaced it with their own bland anonymity. Upstairs, the feeling intensified. Mildred's bedroom, with its lace curtains and antique dressing table, now held a stark, modern bed frame and minimalist decor. Clothes that were definitely not Mildred's, dark, practical garments, hung in the closet. In the bathroom, a man's razor lay on the sink, next to a tube of toothpaste with the cap left carelessly off. A wave of confusion washed over Sarah, quickly followed by a prickle of fear. Who was living here? And why hadn't anyone told her? The lawyer had simply handed over the keys with a polite, "Congratulations on your inheritance, Ms. Evans." There had been no mention of any tenants, no lease agreements, no indication that she wasn't the sole occupant of this property. She walked through the rest of the house, each room adding another layer to the unsettling puzzle. A child's drawing, vibrant with colors, was taped to the refrigerator. A pair of muddy boots sat by the back door. In the guest bedroom, which Mildred had always kept meticulously prepared for visitors who rarely came, there was a collection of well-worn paperback novels and a travel mug bearing the logo of a local construction company. It was becoming increasingly clear. Someone was not just staying here temporarily. They had settled in, made this house their home. But who were they? And where was Mildred's presence in all of this? It was as if she had vanished, her life and memories scrubbed away by an unseen hand. Sarah's mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible situation. Had Mildred taken in a boarder in her final years? It seemed unlikely. Her great-aunt had always been fiercely independent and private. Could it be a relative Sarah didn't know about? The family tree was a tangled mess of distant cousins and forgotten connections. As the afternoon light began to fade, casting long, eerie shadows across the unfamiliar rooms, Sarah found herself in Mildred's study. This room, more than any other, held the essence of her great-aunt. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with well-loved volumes, and the large oak desk was always cluttered with papers, photographs, and half-written letters. But even here, the sense of displacement was palpable. The photographs on the desk were gone, replaced by a single, framed picture of a young boy with a gap-toothed smile. The letters had been cleared away, and the drawers of the desk felt strangely empty when Sarah hesitantly pulled them open. In the bottom drawer, tucked beneath a faded blue shawl that Sarah recognized as one of Mildred's favorites, she found a small, locked wooden box. It was plain, unadorned, but it felt heavy in her hands. A wave of intuition, sharp and sudden, told her that this box held answers. Perhaps not all the answers, but a key, a starting point to unravel the mystery of who was living in her inherited house and what had become of the life Mildred had built within its walls. The silence in the house seemed to deepen, pressing in on Sarah as she held the locked box. The weight of it felt significant, promising secrets and perhaps something more sinister. She was no longer just an inheritor. She was an intruder in a life she didn't understand, a life that had somehow taken root in the place that should have held only the echoes of her past. The question that hung heavy in the air was not just who was living here, but why were they living here, and what connection did they have to the woman who had left this house to her? The stillness of the house waited, holding its breath for the secrets to be revealed. The weight of the small wooden box in Sarah's hands was disproportionate to its size, each ounce seeming to carry a hidden story. Back downstairs, the last vestiges of daylight were bleeding from the windows, casting long, distorted shapes across the living room. The unfamiliar slippers by the armchair seemed to mock her presence, a silent assertion that this was no longer her space. Sarah found a sturdy letter opener in one of the kitchen drawers, another item that didn't belong, and carefully tried to pry open the lock of the box. It was old and stiff, but after a few tense moments, a soft click echoed in the silent room. Her heart pounded in her chest as she lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed tissue paper, were a collection of old photographs, a small stack of letters tied with a faded ribbon, and a tarnished silver key. The photographs were mostly black and white, depicting Mildred at different stages of her life. A young woman with bright eyes and a confident smile, a middle-aged lady tending her beloved roses, and finally, a frail elderly woman with the same kind gaze Sarah remembered. Mixed in were more recent color photos, the kind taken with a smartphone, showing Mildred with a younger man. His arm was often around her, his smile warm and genuine. It was a side of her great-aunt that Sarah had never known. The letters were addressed to Mildred, the handwriting unfamiliar. Sarah carefully untied the ribbon and unfolded the top letter. It was dated just a few months before Mildred's passing. "My dearest Mildred, it breaks my heart that I cannot be there with you right now. Little Leo is still under the weather, and the doctor advised against travel. He misses his Granny Millie terribly, and so do I. You are constantly in our thoughts, and we are sending all our love and strength. I promise we will visit as soon as Leo is better. Take care of yourself, my love. Always, David." Little Leo. Granny Millie. My love. The words swam before Sarah's eyes. Who was David? And who was Leo? The photograph of the gap-toothed boy on Mildred's study desk suddenly clicked into place. This was Leo, Mildred's grandson, apparently. But Sarah had never heard of any family beyond her own branch. Mildred had always been the last of her line, or so Sarah believed. The other letters echoed the same sentiments, filled with affection and concern for Mildred's well-being, signed by David. There were mentions of everyday life, of Leo's school and hobbies, of David's work. It painted a picture of a close, loving relationship, a family unit that had somehow formed around her solitary great-aunt. The The tarnished silver key felt cold in Sarah's palm. There was a small tag attached to it. The ink faded but still legible. Attic. A sense of urgency propelled Sarah upstairs. The attic had always been a mysterious place during her childhood visits, filled with forgotten treasures and dust-covered secrets. Now, it felt like it held the key to understanding the present mystery. The attic door was tucked away at the end of the hallway, almost hidden in the shadows. It creaked loudly as Sarah pulled it open, releasing a musty smell that spoke of years of undisturbed stillness. Climbing the narrow wooden stairs, she found herself in a large, dimly lit space filled with the ghosts of Mildred's past. Old furniture draped with white sheets, stacks of dusty boxes, and forgotten relics of a bygone era lined the walls. It took a while for Sarah's eyes to adjust to the gloom. As she moved deeper into the attic, she noticed a small, locked trunk tucked away in a corner. The silver key in her hand felt like it belonged there. With a click, the trunk sprang open. Inside, Sarah found more photographs, but these were older, going back decades. There were pictures of a young Mildred with a man Sarah didn't recognize, their faces full of youthful joy. There were wedding photos, a baby's christening, and years of family gatherings. This was clearly Mildred's family, the family Sarah had never known existed. Beneath the photographs, Sarah found a bundle of letters, tied with a different, now brittle ribbon. These were addressed to Mildred from the man in the photos, a man named Thomas. The letters spoke of deep love, of shared dreams, and then, gradually, of heartache and separation. The last few letters were filled with a desperate sadness, hinting at a tragedy that had torn them apart. One letter, dated many years later, stood out. It was from a lawyer, informing Mildred of Thomas's passing and mentioning a young son, David, who was now in foster care. A son Mildred had never mentioned. The pieces began to fall into place, forming a heartbreaking picture. Thomas, the love of Mildred's life, had died, leaving behind a son she may not have known how to find, or perhaps was prevented from finding. Could this David be the same David who wrote the recent letters? And was Leo his son, Mildred's great-grandson? A wave of understanding washed over Sarah, mingled with a sense of profound sadness for the life her great-aunt had lived. A life filled with love and loss that she had kept hidden for so long. But it also raised new questions. If David was Mildred's grandson, why hadn't Sarah, her closest living relative, or so she thought, known about him? And if David and his son were Mildred's family, why were they living in the house as if they owned it, without any communication with Sarah, the legal inheritor? As Sarah sifted through the contents of the trunk, she found a small, worn diary. Its pages, brittle with age, were filled with Mildred's elegant handwriting. Hesitantly, Sarah began to read. The early entries spoke of her love for Thomas, their dreams for the future. Then came the devastating entries about his death, the lawyer's letter, and Mildred's agonizing decision about David. She wrote of wanting to reach out, but also of her fear and uncertainty. She was alone, grieving, and perhaps felt ill-equipped to raise a child. The diary entries jumped forward years, filled with Mildred's solitary life, her garden, her books. Then, a more recent entry caught Sarah's eye. It was dated a few years prior. A young man came to the door today. He said his name was David. He had Thomas's eyes. He knew about me, about his father. He had been searching for me for years. We talked for hours. He has a son, Leo. My Thomas would have loved them both. They are staying for dinner. My heart feels full, and yet so heavy with all the lost years. Subsequent entries detailed David and Leo's visits, the growing bond between them and Mildred. It seemed that in her final years, Mildred had finally found the family she had lost so long ago. But the last few entries were different. They were shorter, more fragmented, filled with a growing unease. Mildred wrote of feeling unwell, of David becoming increasingly involved in her affairs, of signing papers she didn't fully understand. There was a sense of vulnerability in her words, a hint of something amiss. The very last entry was just a few weeks before Mildred's death. It was brief and chilling. David insists it's for my own good. He says I need to trust him. But I'm scared. A cold dread washed over Sarah. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, But the picture they formed was far more disturbing than she could have imagined. The loving grandson, the happy family reunion. Had it all been a facade? What had David convinced Mildred to do? And why were they still living in the house, acting as if they belonged there, while Sarah, the rightful owner, was left in the dark? The silence of the attic no longer felt like the stillness of forgotten memories, but the heavy quiet before a terrible storm. Sarah descended the creaking attic stairs, the diary clutched tightly in her hand. The comfortable familiarity of her childhood memories of Willow Creek Lane had been completely shattered, replaced by a chilling sense of betrayal and a desperate need to understand the truth. Downstairs, the house felt different now. The unfamiliar objects, the slippers, the teacup, the child's drawing no longer seemed like innocent signs of someone living there. They felt like markers in an unwelcome occupation, a silent assertion of a life that had somehow intertwined itself with Mildred's in a way that now felt deeply unsettling. Driven by a sense of urgency, Sarah decided to search the rest of the house more thoroughly. She went through drawers, cabinets, anywhere Mildred's documents or personal belongings might still be hidden. In Mildred's bedroom, tucked away in a locked drawer of the antique dressing table, she found more papers. These were legal documents, deeds, property tax bills, and, most shockingly, a recent transfer of ownership of the house from Mildred Evans to David Miller. David Miller, the name in the letters, the concerned grandson, was now the legal owner of the property Sarah had inherited. A cold wave of anger and disbelief washed over her. How could this have happened? Had Mildred willingly given her house away? The fearful last entry in the diary screamed otherwise. David insists it's for my own good, but I'm scared. Sarah remembered the lawyer's impersonal phone call, the casual handing over of the keys. Had he known about this transfer? Had he deliberately withheld this crucial information? A knot of suspicion tightened in her chest. Just then, Sarah heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Her heart leaped into her throat. David and Leo. They were here. Panic surged through her. She wasn't ready to confront them, not yet. She needed more time to process what she had found, to figure out what to do. She quickly retreated to the living room and hid behind the heavy velvet curtains just as the front door opened. David Miller stepped inside, a young boy, presumably Leo, holding his hand. David looked to be in his late 30s, with kind eyes that seemed at odds with the cold, calculating actions Sarah now suspected him of. Leo was the spitting image of the boy in the photograph on Mildred's desk, his gap-toothed smile radiating an innocent charm that tugged at Sarah's heart, even in her current state of turmoil. "Grandma's house feels so empty without her," Leo said, his voice small and tinged with sadness. "She's in a better place now, buddy," David replied, ruffling the boy's hair. "This is still our home, and we'll take good care of it, just like we promised her." Their words were like a knife twisting in Sarah's gut. Our home. They spoke as if they had every right to be there, as if she were the intruder. Sarah watched as they moved through the house, their movements familiar and comfortable. David went into the kitchen and started preparing a snack for Leo, while the boy played quietly with some toys in the living room, toys that Sarah had never seen before. It was a picture of domesticity, a family settled in their home, but Sarah knew the truth lurking beneath the surface. Deciding she couldn't hide any longer, Sarah stepped out from behind the curtains. David turned sharply, his eyes widening in surprise. Leo looked up, his innocent gaze meeting hers with curiosity. "Who are you?" David asked, his voice wary. "My name is Sarah Evans," she replied, her voice trembling slightly but firm. "I am Mildred's great-niece. I inherited this house." A flicker of something, perhaps guilt, perhaps anger, crossed David's face before he quickly masked it with an expression of polite surprise. "Oh, Sarah, Mildred mentioned you. We weren't expecting you so soon. I received the keys from the lawyer a few days ago," Sarah said, her eyes fixed on him. "I came to see the house." "Of course," David said, his tone overly friendly. "Well, come in, make yourself comfortable. Leo and I have been taking care of the place since Mildred passed." Sarah stepped fully into the room, her gaze sweeping over their belongings, the tangible evidence of their occupation. It seems you've been doing more than just taking care of it, David. He shifted uncomfortably. Mildred wanted us here. She considered us her family. I found some documents upstairs, Sarah continued, her voice hardening. Documents that show the house is now legally in your name. The color drained from David's face. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The last entry in Mildred's diary, Sarah pressed on, holding up the worn notebook, said she was scared of you, David. That you were making her sign papers she didn't understand. Leo, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, looked from David to Sarah with wide, frightened eyes. That's not true, David finally stammered, his voice rising defensively. Mildred was old, confused. I was just helping her manage her affairs. Helping her by taking her house? Sarah challenged. By isolating her from the rest of her family? She wanted us here, David insisted, his voice now laced with desperation. She was lonely. We gave her companionship, love, and in return, you manipulated her into giving you her most valuable asset, Sarah countered. Did you even tell her she was signing away her house? David's eyes darted around the room, as if searching for an escape. Leo began to whimper, clutching at David's leg. It wasn't like that, David said, his voice softening slightly as he looked down at Leo. Mildred wanted Leo to have a secure future. She knew I would take care of him. And what about me, her actual blood relative? Sarah asked, her voice filled with hurt and anger. Didn't she want to provide for me? A tense silence hung in the air, broken only by Leo's quiet sobs. David's carefully constructed facade had crumbled, revealing the desperation and perhaps the guilt beneath. Suddenly, the front door swung open again, and a woman stepped inside. She was in her late 30s, with a sharp, no-nonsense demeanor. David, I forgot my... She stopped short, her eyes landing on Sarah. Who are you? David's face paled further. This is Sarah, Mildred's niece. The woman's gaze was cold and assessing. And what are you doing here? I inherited this house, Sarah stated firmly. The woman exchanged a quick glance with David, a silent communication passing between them. There must be some mistake, she said, her voice hard. This house belongs to David. I have the documents to prove otherwise, Sarah replied, reaching for her bag. So do we, the woman retorted, stepping closer, her eyes narrowing. Mildred signed it over to David willingly. No, she didn't. Leo suddenly piped up, his small voice surprisingly clear. He looked at Sarah, his eyes filled with a heartbreaking honesty. Grandma Millie was sad when she signed the papers. She didn't want to. The woman's face hardened. Leo, be quiet. But the boy's innocent words hung heavy in the air, a damning indictment of David and the woman. The truth, stripped bare by a child's honesty, was finally out in the open. Mildred had been manipulated, coerced into giving away her house. Her final act of love and generosity twisted into something selfish and deceitful. The comfortable illusion of a happy family had shattered, revealing the cold reality of their calculated plan. Leo's simple, heartfelt words hung in the tense silence, their innocence cutting through the web of deceit David and the woman had tried to weave. The woman, whose name Sarah would later learn was Carol, shot a furious glance at the little boy, her facade of composure finally cracking. Leo doesn't understand, Carol said quickly, her voice strained. He's just a child. But the damage was done. Sarah saw the truth in Leo's eyes, a truth that mirrored the fear and unease in the final entries of Mildred's diary. The pieces of the puzzle had clicked into place, revealing a picture of manipulation and betrayal that chilled her to the bone. I think Leo understands perfectly well, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the turmoil churning within her. He understood that his Grandma Millie was unhappy about signing those papers. Papers that transferred her house to you, David. David's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. He avoided Sarah's gaze, his attention fixed on the floor. Carol, however, remained defiant, her eyes blazing with anger. David took care of Mildred, she insisted. She wanted him and Leo to have this house. She loved them. And what about me? Sarah asked, her voice tinged with sadness. Didn't she love me too? Didn't she intend for me to have this house, as her will clearly stated? The mention of the will seemed to deflate Carol's anger slightly, a flicker of unease crossing her face. There was a new will, she mumbled, avoiding eye contact. A will that Mildred signed when she was scared and felt she had to trust David? Sarah challenged. I think we both know that will isn't valid. The confrontation that followed was difficult and emotionally charged. Sarah laid out everything she had discovered, the letters, the photographs, the diary entries, the original will she had found amongst Mildred's papers. She pointed out the inconsistencies, the red flags, the clear indication that Mildred had been manipulated in her final days. David remained largely silent, his head bowed in shame. Carol, however, continued to argue, insisting that their intentions were good, that they had only wanted to provide for Mildred and ensure Leo's future. But her arguments rang hollow against the weight of the evidence and the undeniable truth in Leo's tearful confession. Eventually, faced with Sarah's unwavering resolve and the growing weight of their deception, David and Carol's resistance crumbled. They admitted that while Mildred had grown close to them, the transfer of the house had been rushed and perhaps not entirely understood by her. They had convinced themselves that it was what she wanted, twisting her affection and vulnerability to their own ends. The legal process that followed was lengthy and complex, but ultimately, Sarah was able to reclaim ownership of the house. The new will was contested and deemed invalid due to the circumstances surrounding its signing. David and Carol, facing potential legal repercussions, eventually agreed to vacate the property. Saying goodbye to Leo was the hardest part. Despite everything, Sarah couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for the little boy who had unknowingly been caught in the middle of his father's scheme. She knew that he had genuinely loved Mildred, and the bond they had formed was real. As they left, Leo turned back to Sarah, his eyes filled with a sadness that mirrored her own. In the weeks that followed, Sarah began the difficult task of sorting through Mildred's belongings, piecing together the fragments of her gray tant's life. She found more photographs of Thomas, the lost love of Mildred's youth, and realized the depth of the sadness she had carried for so many years. The arrival of David and Leo had, in a way, brought a sense of family back into Mildred's life, albeit one that was ultimately tainted by greed. As Sarah stood in the now empty house, the silence no longer felt heavy and expectant, but rather peaceful, like the quiet after a storm has passed. The ghosts of the past still lingered, but now they were accompanied by a sense of closure. She knew that Mildred would have wanted her to have this house, the place filled with so many memories, both happy and sad. Sarah decided to keep the house. She spent months renovating it, carefully preserving the original features while adding her own touches. She learned about Mildred's life, her passions, and the quiet strength that had carried her through so much. In a way, inheriting the house had not just given Sarah property. It had given her a connection to a part of her family history she never knew existed. Sometimes, she would find herself looking at the photograph of young Leo on Mildred's study desk, and she would feel a pang of sadness for him. He was an innocent child who had been used in his father's scheme. Sarah hoped that one day, when he was older, she could reach out to him and share the stories of his great-grandmother, the real stories, not the twisted version he had been told. The inheritance of the house on Willow Creek Lane had been far more than just a transaction of property. It had been a journey into the secrets of her family's past, a confrontation with greed and betrayal, and ultimately, a rediscovery of connection and belonging. The house, once filled with unsettling silence and the presence of strangers, now felt like home, a testament to the enduring power of family and the importance of uncovering the truth, no matter how painful it might be. And so, as our story draws to a close, we are left with the lingering thought that sometimes, the greatest inheritances are not material possessions, but the untold stories and hidden truths that shape our lives and connect us to those who came before. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story of mystery, family secrets, and the unexpected twists of fate, please give this video a like. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more captivating tales, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the intriguing and sometimes dark corners of life. We love hearing your thoughts, so please share your comments below. Until next time, take care.